Hey, realtors, two things that you don't have to be scared about. Two things that you don't have to be scared about with this upcoming settlement of the NAR lawsuit. My name is Scott Groves. I own a company called Consolidated Coaching, and I have coached hundreds of loan officers and realtors over the last 8 years of having this coaching company. And there's two things that I'm hearing from realtors with this NAR settlement that you absolutely do not have to be worried about, right? And there's plenty of things, quite frankly, in this NAR settlement that I think is going to change the way business is done, right? Obviously, sellers won't be able to advertise on the MLS what the commission is. Realtors will have to have better conversations with their clients about how these commissions get paid. You're going to have to sign some broker buyer agreements. Like, there will be some stuff that changes, right? You realtors will have to better articulate your value now that that's not kind of hid behind the scenes with a credit from the seller in order to go to the buyer, and it kind of just happens without the knowledge of the buyer. That's going to change. I'm not going to lie about that. But here's a couple things from the lending side that you don't have to be scared of. I've heard a lot of realtors ask me, like, well, how are the loan officers, or how is the loan going to be able to pay or finance the buyer's commission, right? And I'm going to use a round number. When I've been doing loans, they've mostly been in Los Angeles, Las Vegas, Austin. I'm just going to use, for the ease of math, a $500,000 purchase price, right? Now, look, any listing agent who's worth their salt, or any seller who's paying attention, is probably going to realize, or the listing agent is going to educate the seller on, hey, if you don't pay any type of commission structure to the buyer's agent, it's probably going to limit your pool of buyers. And any incremental dollars that you pick up on, like saving fees and not paying the buyer's agent, well, you're probably going to lose in a more competitive situation that could help drive the price up if you have a large pool of buyers, right? And if you're watching this video, do me a favor, pound the like button a bunch of times, leave a comment just so it tells the algorithm that other people should be watching it. Now, here's the thing. The seller can absolutely offer a credit to the buyer to pay for the buyer's real estate agent's buyer's commission, right? And I'm going to go through a couple different examples because the math is important here. But again, we're sticking with a $500,000 property. Let's say you, the buyer's agent, you talk to your buyer and you're like, hey, we got to talk about this new lawsuit. My goal here is to make 2% on helping you buy a house. I think that's what I'm worth. I'm going to be doing a lot of work for you behind the scenes. I'm going to negotiate hard on your behalf. I'm going to be there to protect you during the inspections, all the ways that buyers agents can articulate their value. So you make your offer for $500,000, and what you will probably want to do in this hypothetical situation as the buyer's agent is tell the seller up front, hey, we're offering $500,000, but we would like a 2% buyer's credit back from the seller upfront, negotiated for, in this scenario, $10,000. Now, we're all going to know that that $10,000 is going towards the buyer's agent commission. What I've heard from a lot of buyer's agents is, oh my God, Scott, I can't do that, because what if then during the normal inspections or the request for repairs, we have to ask for more money? Totally fine. Totally fine. So let's use this example. You're buying the house with a FHA loan, right? You, the buyer's agent, put in an offer for $500,000. You're requesting upfront a 2% seller concession to help pay for the buyer's commission. Then during the inspections, you find about $5,000 worth of stuff that needs to be fixed, right? Maybe there's some deferred maintenance on the electrical panel. There's some deferred maintenance on the roof. Nothing that would prevent you from getting an FHA loan or closing the deal with the lender. But there are some repairs that you, as the buyer's agent, want to fight for your client to get based on the condition of the house. Well, here's the beautiful thing. FHA allows a maximum of 6% of the sales price to go towards seller concessions to the buyer. So let's say you were getting your full 3% as the buyer's agent. FHA still allows for another 3%, right, credit to go to the buyer. So in this $500,000 purchase scenario, that's $30,000 that can be credited from the seller to the buyer to pay for buyer's commissions, repairs on the house, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And by the way, even if you were in a really messed up situation where the seller had a ton of deferred maintenance and a ton of repairs, above and beyond that 6%, the seller can pay for any amount of work on their side of the transaction. So you could even get into a situation where the buyer requests upfront their 3%, so in this case $15,000 as a seller credit to go towards the buyer, so the buyer can pay for their realtor commissions. And then if there was 15,000, 20,000, 25,000 repairs, you could get that either as a credit over to the buyer, or if that number, which I've been doing loans for 25 years, I've probably only seen this happen a handful of times. If for some reason that total concession, the realtor's fee and the repairs that need to be done in the house exceeded the 6%, exceeded $30,000, which it's probably not going to, the seller could pay for a bunch of those repairs with a vendor of their choice and have that paid directly out of title or escrow to that vendor. And if it doesn't show up on the buyer's side of the equation, if it's just repairs that the seller is doing, that's totally fine. Now, you say, okay, FHA, that works for FHA, but what about conventional? Conventional is a little bit different. If you're putting down only 5%, right? So you're putting 5% down on a conventional loan currently, and this could change very quickly. Currently, conventional loans allow for a 3% credit. So the numbers get a little bit tighter if your client's using a conventional loan with only 5% down, because then the guidelines say that you can only maximize at a 3% of the sales price credit. So if you got 5% down conventional, this might be a conversation where it's like, well, do we flip to FHA, take advantage of the better rate because there's now some repairs on the house in addition to the buyer's commission? Maybe, maybe not. Luckily, most of our clients, most of the clients that I'm seeing across the nation are coming with a down payment that exceeds 10%. Conventional loan, down payment that exceeds 10%. Again, we're back to that same 6% threshold. So there's plenty of money per the lending guidelines that allow for the seller to pay with a seller credit. And yes, I understand it can't be advertised on the MLS. Yes, I understand it has to be negotiated. Yes, I understand this will all play into what's the net dollar that the seller is getting. However, there is, by the current structure of loans, which could change in the benefit of the realtors any moment, right? Once this becomes kind of commonplace and customary for the market. Currently, with 10% down conventional, FHA, there are plenty of credits available in the current structure that can go to pay for the commission. But Scott, what about VA? I've heard before that on VA loans, the seller nor the buyer can pay for the agent's commission, or the buyer's not allowed money out of their pocket for this, or there's unallowables from the seller. The good news is, in a rare moment of clarity from the government, right? The VA and the government agencies that write the VA guidelines, they're usually like a decade behind, right? In this scenario, they are leading the charge with clarification. So VA currently says the maximum allowable credit from the seller to a buyer is 4%, right? So whether you're doing a VA loan with 0% down, or you're doing a VA loan with 25% down because the client is a veteran and they want the better rates associated with a VA loan instead of a conventional loan, the VA currently says you can only have 4% go from a seller credit to a buyer. However, great news for realtors, the Veterans Administration, has recently released a circular or an FAQ or an update to policy saying that if paying for a buyer's commission with a seller credit is customary for the market, which is exactly what it will be, well then the VA will allow the 4% credit plus the buyer's commission to be credited. So you could get into a situation, again, you're buying a $500,000 house, 0 down, you negotiate as the realtor upfront 2.5 points to go towards the buyer's commission, right? Doesn't matter. That doesn't fall into your 4% allowable, which means on 500,000, 4%, 20 grand, you could still find $20,000 of repairs or upgrades or things that you want to negotiate as the buyer's agent with the seller, and they could still pay that whole 4% credit to your buyer, and on top of that, pay the buyer's commission. Now, I will tell you there's one area where it gets a little tricky. We haven't had any guideline updates on this, specifically on conventional loans for investment properties. Conventional loans for investment properties, there is a cap of 2%. And there's currently no guidance that looks like that's going to change. So if you are an investor buying an investment property and you want the seller to pay for either some repairs or your buyer's agent's commission, that's currently capped at 2%. So with investors, they might have to have that conversation. More accurately, you buyer's agents might have to have that conversation with your buyers if they're buying investment property and just say, look, the maximum we can get from the seller is 2%. We will ask for that upfront to help pay for the buyer's agent's commission. And or for repairs, but there's probably going to be some money out of your pocket, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, to pay for your agent's commission, right? And this is only specifically on buyers who are buying investment properties with a conventional loan. So here, the next question that will come up from realtors is like, but Scott, if I'm asking, or if I'm offering for my buyer $500,000 and we're asking for 2 points back, that means the net number to the seller is $490. Okay, so that's how it used to work before. If a property went on the market at $500,000, there was already an expectation that the seller was going to pay a seller's commission and a buyer's commission out of that $500,000. They weren't conceptualizing that they were going to net the full $500,000. They were going to net that $500,000 minus the fees to the buyers and the buyer's agent as possible commissions. So if you have to, right, if it's a matter of the net number to the seller, offer 505, offer 510 with a credit back. I will tell you, in most scenarios, there is enough equity in the area, there are enough comparables that an appraiser's normally not going to bring things in, $5,000 or $10,000 lower than the purchase price if they can justify it with other comps. So the next concern, that's concern number one, right? Like, how are buyer's agents going to get paid? By the way, if you've stuck around or you're watching this, smash the like button and or share this with your realtors. If you're a loan officer, if you're a realtor, leave a comment. I would really appreciate that. Concern number two is like, well, Scott, I've heard this a lot and I don't really understand this one. I think somebody in the real estate world has really made a mountain out of a molehill, and it's just permeated fear-based through the real estate community. A lot of realtors are saying, but Scott, if we're offering $500,000 and it's upfront in the documentation that there's a 2% credit going to the buyer simply to pay buyer's commissions, $10,000, doesn't this mean that every appraisal is going to come in at $490? Aren't the appraisers going to discount the commission that's being paid to the seller because that's just a fee and they're going to appraise the property low? No, that's not the case, because guess what? That information has already been baked into the cake for the entirety that you and I have been doing real estate, right? The appraiser always knew, they probably knew in an easier form because it was public information on the MLS, hey, buyer's agent gets 3%. And there was no standard for appraisals to say, okay, well, this house is going on the market at $500,000, but I know from the public NMLS comments, 3% is going towards the buyer's agent commission. So I'm going to reduce the value of the house by 3%, in this case, $15,000, and I'm going to bring the appraisal in at $485,000. That doesn't happen. That's not how it currently works. Now, for those of you that really geek out about appraisals, there is a grid on the appraisal where you can talk about financing and what the other dollar figures associated with the property are. But let's use another example, right? My house goes on the market at $500,000. I'm offering a 2.5% seller's credit, right, to the buyer upfront to pay for the buyer's agent commission. If down the street there's a comp that sold for $500,000 3 months ago, and that's our number one comp, the appraiser never in the past, nor would I expect it in the future, they're never going to that number one comp and saying, well, that sold for $500,000, but there was a 3% buyer's concession allowed to pay for the buyer's agent. So that house really should have sold at $485. It sold for $500. So I'm going to discount the value of this subject property that I'm doing an appraisal on. That's never happened in the past. I don't foresee a future where that happens either, right? So two big fears that buyers agents are having, and that's kind of permeating throughout the real estate world, is like, oh my goodness, there will be no way to finance or no way to get a credit from the seller over to the buyer to pay for the buyer's fee. Under all current guidelines and projected guidelines and VA updates, that's just not the case. There are plenty of ways to have the seller offer a credit, right? Have that credit go onto the buyer's side of the closing statement and have that credit pay for the buyer's commission. And I don't even really see a world where this starts to negatively or adversely affect appraisals. So look, I get it. If you're a buyer's agent, a little bit of a fearful time. You've got to figure out how to articulate your value, right? If there is a seller who's very staunchly saying, nope, absolutely not. I want to sell the house for $500,000 and net $500,000 and I'm not paying any buyer's commission out of it. Okay, well then offer 505 or 510 or 515 and then ask for the credit so that it's the same net number to the seller, and we'll deal with the appraisal when we have to deal with the appraisal, right? We'll figure it out. Now, it's more important than ever, if you're a realtor watching this, that you have a tight relationship with your lender, right? So whatever lender or loan officer shared this, Mr. and Mrs. Realtor, you should get with them. You should be having these kind of conversations. You should be game theory and role playing how you guys are going to have these conversations to articulate to the buyer, hey, it's the same net cost that it always was. It's just going to be baked into the cake a little bit differently, right? All the ingredients of the deal are the same. We're just mixing it up. I always joke with my wife. She's very traditionally Hispanic. I'm like, you Mexicans, you have like one type of food, right? It's like meat, cheese, beans, and tortillas. And just depending on how you stack it, you call it a tostada or a taco or an enchilada, but it's like all the same ingredients, right? Same thing is going on here with how real estate will happen going forward, right? It's just a matter of how do we work the numbers? How do we legally work within the framework of what lenders will allow? And how do we evolve as an industry? So again, plenty of stuff to learn, Mr. and Mrs. Realtor, on how you articulate your value, but how you actually have this happen structurally, it's not changing a whole lot. Instead of just being something that happens behind the scenes, which was the settlement saying that it was collusion. Now it's just going to be out in the open, which is totally fine. It'll be a negotiated credit. It will come as a credit from the seller to the buyer. The buyer will use that credit to pay their buyer's commission. And then if you need to negotiate for more above and beyond that, as long as you don't exceed this 6% on conventional loans, more than 10% down, 4% credits plus the buyer's commission on VA, you're going to be in totally good hands, right? And so have the dialogue with your loan officer, the loan officer that share this. Talk about how you're going to explain this to the client, right? You're going to have more conversations, Mr. and Mrs. Realtor, with your lender about how to structure the offer, how these things are going to work, what the net number is that the seller is looking for, and it should just elevate the professionalism of the entire industry. So I hope this helped. If for some reason you like this video, do me a favor, share it. Again, Scott Groves, Consolidated Coaching. I coach loan officers and realtors. So if you're looking for coaching, get in touch, DM me, and hopefully, one of the things I talk about in my coaching a lot is like we as the professional, the lender, the realtor, we need to be a thermostat and not a thermometer. Meaning we need to control the temperature in the room, right? If everybody's freaking out and they're seeing all this negativity in the meeting, we got to be able, in the media, sorry, not the meeting, they're seeing all this negativity in the media. We got to be able to turn that temperature down with the way that we explain things and we empathize and we educate, right? Don't be a thermometer who's just matching the intensity and the temperature of what the market and the media and angry clients are telling you should feel. Like, we just want to be a thermostat. Bring everything down a notch, calm down, it's going to be okay. There is a way to do this legally, structurally, the lender's on board, the relationship from the lender and the realtor will never be more important than it is over the next 6 months so that we can make sure we're educating the buyer, making things better. Love you lots. Again, if you liked this video or if you watched any portion of it, especially if you got here all the way to the end, can you just leave a comment, hit the like button, share it to your audience of realtors and lenders because this is really important stuff. All right, love you lots. Talk soon. I'm looking forward to the middle of August when we all get past this. We find out that we are really just making a mountain out of a molehill and everything goes forward peacefully. Talk to you soon. Bye.